Hello, 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 everybody, and welcome back to another evening of gaming with me, Seal the Centurion. I hope you're all having a good day. To our American friends, I hope you're all having a good Veterans Day or had a good Veterans Day. And to our friends across the pond over in Europe, I hope you all had a good Remembrance Day or Armistice Day. It's just that day where, at least in the United States, since we already had a Remembrance Day before the First World War, we had Decoration Day, which turned into Memorial Day, which stemmed from the American Civil War. For us, today is Veterans Day, where we take time to thank the veterans, those who decided to serve our country in the armed forces. It's like, thankfully, there are many who have not saw combat, but there are also many more who have. And it's a hard thing. And our European brothers, remember those who left and did not come back home. Or if they did come back home, it was in a wooden box. And I always find it interesting where everybody's like, oh, yes. Like in the United States, when somebody goes, oh, happy Memorial Day, it's like, you seem to be missing the point. It's not a day that many people view as a happy day. There's actually one thing that I would like to read for you all this evening. It's a post that I wrote a few years ago on Facebook. And I'll just adapt to the dates on it. It's actually 4 years ago that I wrote this. And I'll just modify the dates so it's still accurate. 106 years ago, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the guns of Europe fell silent. The 4 years of fighting were over. Never before had the world seen such efficient and meaningless destruction of life. The war to end all wars, which would really only change all wars, was over. We take time today to remember those who were able to return home. No one can truly know the horrors of war unless they had been there. We cannot learn lessons from or truly comprehend the stories of numbers on a page. It is the living, the people, the names, the stories that are told that truly make them special. The people who resigned themselves to take up arms in defense of their family, country, and ideals are truly a remarkable bunch. My great-grandfather survived years in a Nazi POW camp after his homeland of the Netherlands was invaded. I never met him. It is the stories my grandmother tells me that gives me a small glance into what that time was like for him. My grandfather has been at peace for 15 years now. Many people hated him for the war he fought. I never heard him talk about it. Many of his stories are lost to us. My uncle served this country for many years in the SEAL teams. Most of us probably will never live to see the day that we truly know what happened on his battlefields. Abraham Lincoln famously said, "We cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground." The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. We will never truly know their struggle unless we take up arms ourselves, which I pray that day may never come. Many continue to fight even though we cannot see it. Today, find a veteran and tell them thank you for the work they have done to ensure that you and I may never have to know the struggle that they endured and many continue to endure. Thank you that we are free to speak our minds, free to worship as we see fit, free to live our lives to the glory of God. Honestly, that's probably one of the best things I've ever written. It's one of those things where, when you go back in hindsight, even now, things have changed since I've written that. My grandmother's passed on this past year. So I no longer even have her stories to remember my great-grandfather by, who I never even met. As time progresses, our ability to remember tends to wane. So it's an important thing that, for those who are here, that we take the time to talk, to remember. If you were in the Discord, if you saw my post today, which I'll read the snippet of as well, there's a very good quote by Robert E. Lee. He said, "It is well that war is so terrible. Otherwise, we should grow too fond of it." War is a terrible thing. It is a very terrible thing. And only those who have experienced it can truly understand fully the terribleness of war. Us back at home, we can have some idea of it, but never truly completely understand. And it is important for us to remember. Because if we do not remember the horrors of war, then war becomes an all too appealing option for nations and peoples to settle their differences. And that is why Remembrance Day is such an important day. Because we have to remember. We remember the dead, and we remember their sacrifice, and we remember why they had to sacrifice themselves. Now on to today's devotional. So far we have been providentially blessed to have our devotionals fall in line with some of the things we were doing on stream, some of the things we were talking about. As always, our devotional is coming from Honey from the Rock, written by Abraham Kuyper. We are on number 33, entitled Walk in the Light of Your Fire, which is inspired by Isaiah 50, verse 11, which says, "Look, all of you who have set a fire and arm yourselves with burning torches, walk in the light of your fire and of the torches you have ignited." The Lord has no patience for willfulness, not even when one's pain is at its worst. Even if you should be overwhelmed by the waves and breakers, The Lord doesn't want you devising a way out all by yourself. He wants you to expect your deliverance in the way He provides for you. This applies to your heart, to you as an individual, and also to all of God's people. Even His people escape from under His chastening hand in no other way than through the opening that He provides. All human agitating and conniving, all the inventiveness and cleverness that people are capable of showing in their attempt to escape by an act of sheer self-will, doesn't help us one bit. Those efforts only get us in deeper. All glory must be the Lord's, even with respect to our foolishness and the path that we have willfully chosen. When we sit in the ruins of our beautiful, sacred home, and God gives us ashes for bread and tears to drink, so that our souls flee in fear, and a chilling desolation oppresses our hearts, then God provides us with a comforter. This is a comforter who shows divine compassion, and who is the only one among all comforters who is able to say, I know just what to say, and at just the right time to lift up your spirits. And when that Messiah sees the people of his God humbled in sadness and fear, in darkness and gloom, he speaks words that grip our hearts. Who is there among you that fears the Lord? Who is there that listens to the voice of his servant? If such a person walks in darkness and has no light, let him truly trust in the name of the Lord, and let him lean on no one but his God. But that's not what the heart wants to do. It takes too long before light comes. So, taking control of our destiny out of the hands of the living God, we willfully reach for the flint and strike a spark. Holding the wick close so that it catches fire, we watch the torch burst into flame. Holding the wick, then we celebrate our own ingenuity, what we have accomplished, and the salvation we have achieved all by ourselves. That's when we call out to our neighbor, look, the darkness is gone. The fire's burning brightly. Everything around us glitters. It's bathed in a sea of light. No, don't be afraid that the Lord will blow out your fire. On the contrary, he will feed and fan it until it finally becomes too intense for you. At that point, you will become apprehensive about your own fire that to that point had been such a great delight to you. Now you'll begin to plead, O Lord, help us. God of all power, please save us. Save us from this raging fire, lest it consumes us. However, at that point, God will address us angrily. He from whose ways we have departed, he from whose hands we have fallen, he alone on whose name we should have depended for support. He whose glorious light we scorned in favor of the choking smoke of our own torches. At that point, the Holy One of Israel will say, Behold, all of you who have kindled a fire on your own and have armed yourselves with torches, walk by the light of your own fire and of the torches you have lit. This is what you will receive from my hand. You will be humbled in your affliction. And what an unquenchable fire that becomes. It is the fire of bitterness and sorrow. It is the fire of an accusing conscience that singes and scorches and burns in our souls all the days that we have left here on earth. It first breaks out as just deathly terrible fire. Then it grows into a flame that completely envelops us and whose suffocating smoke entraps us. This goes on until finally the windows are flung open and the wonderfully fresh air of eternity wafts over us from the other side of the grave. Even so, who is there who still waits for light from the Lord? Who is there who still anticipates the brightness that shines from the Lord's mountain? Who is there who still possesses a faith, a strong, deep, upright, childlike faith? Who doesn't want to leave the darkness as long as the morning star of God's word has not yet risen in his heart? Yes, what I ask, do you find, even among God's people in many cases, except that they go around with flints in their hands and wax dripping from the torches that they themselves have woven? Thus it seems as if darkness has fled. Then people devote themselves to celebrating instead of lamenting. No sense of God's wrath remains. They have no ear for God's voice of mercy. Then it seems as if the end of all suffering has arrived. But what does this outcome produce except fresh disappointments? One after the other. One upheaval blends into the next. Unrest dominates. There is no more tranquility. The holiness of peace has become unattainable. All that is left is emptiness and dissatisfaction. Where people still think they amount to something, they are consumed by the very fire that they have set. Always. They always have to come up with something new. They always need another incentive. Over time, people lose any trace of being influenced by Holy Scripture and are left with nothing more than their own fantasies, resources, and delusions. These amount to no more than random flames and sparks that dance in the flint around our heads. Dance and flit around our heads. That's when we want to smother the sparks and extinguish the fire. But sadly, that won't happen. Every initiative just stokes the fire once more. Trying to blow out the sparks only makes them grow more intensely. If you try to escape the flames, they suck you in like a raging river. Because, now listen well, this is how the Holy One of Israel judges all willful conceit. If you always want to walk by the light of your own fire, know that it will have disastrous results for you. This is what will come to even for God's own people, should it apply to them as well. May you learn once more to wait for the light that comes from your God. And that is our devotional for this evening. Hello, Royal Heart. I hope you're having a good day today. This is a very good devotional. And it ties in quite well with me personally. Talking about, because if we think of the end, there will be no more night. There'll be no more sun, because God will be our light. And God is expected to be our light. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. I am. Today was my first day at Publix. I enjoyed it. The people there are kind and helpful. Oh, very cool. Still haven't gotten my Publix polo. It'll happen eventually. If that's anything I know about companies, they do things at their own speed. You think they'd be prepared, but nah. No. But talk about trying to walk by your own light. It's quite funny. So, just a little story. When I was younger, I always admired basically the big names in history. Julius Caesar, Napoleon, interested in presidents, the kings of England, all of these great men. Because they took their lives into their own hands and said, you know what? You know what? I am going to do this. I am going to go out and I am going to make a name for myself. I am going to seize power for myself. It is actually quite ironic. If I wasn't going to go into history and education, I was going to go into politics, if you could believe it. But, yeah, that's always an interesting thing to think about. But I decided not to go into politics. But if I did, I mean, the presidency, of course, would have been my end goal. It's like, what media across the world, what do they say? The American president is the most powerful man in the world. And to an extent, yes. But that's just only because of the American alliances and trade agreements and various things like that. He could very quickly not become the most powerful man in the world. But I digress. I always admired presidents. I always admired generals and leaders like that. Because they were people who commanded authority, they led, they went out, they fought, they drove themselves, and they managed to accomplish something. It's like Ulysses S. Grant, one of the saviors of the Union, the man who defeated the Confederates at Vicksburg, opened up the Mississippi River to trade, punched through the South, split the Confederacy in two, and crushed Lee at Appomattox. Then becomes president. Julius Caesar, general, conquers basically half of Europe. France, Spain, even going on into England. Comes back home and then makes himself dictator for life, emperor.